Good morning, Nik Peachey. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to our interview on creativity in the English classroom. Before we start, I'll just introduce Nik. Nik Peachey is an award-winning ELT writer and course designer, and he's also the director of Peachey Publications, which is a treasure trove of resources for any English teacher. He was awarded the British Council ELTon Awards in 2012 and 2016, and he was a finalist for his book, Hacking Creativity, in 2020. Thank you for your time, Nik.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me along.
I'm going to be talking about how teaching has evolved, and it has always been evolving, but recently we've had a sea change, and the new normal has kind of led teachers away from everything that they used to, and the shift has been quite drastic and sudden. So what 3 tips would you give teachers to help them find their footing and to help them cope with this sudden transition?
I guess there are a number of things that they could do to help, with this. I mean, one of the first things, and I think probably one of the most important things, is to see it as something positive. I know that disruption can be, threatening and it can be scary, but, being forced to make a change, reevaluating everything you can do can be a really positive thing. And there's a lot that we can learn from this and develop from this. And I think the other thing connected with this is that, I was speaking to a school director a couple of weeks ago, and he said it's like we've been pushed 10 years into the future. And
Yeah.
I disagree with that, actually. What I believe is that we've actually been dragged 10 years into the present. And, schools have been lagging behind for a long time and sort of avoiding the use of technology and avoiding with engaging with students in this way. And now it's something that we've been forced to do, and we're actually catching up with the present now. So that's another good thing, I think, those sort of changes have been a long time coming. And for teachers who can adjust to teaching in this medium, I think that's something really positive and, something that will enhance your teaching and enable you to take something new from that. The last tip, and I think my biggest tip, is to get used to being in front of the camera.
Yeah.
A lot of us spend a lot of time in front of students, and you don't think of it in the same way. But all of a sudden, you're on the camera. It's no different from what you were doing before, but you can see yourself, and suddenly teachers are very self-conscious. And I think you have to get used to that and learn to work with the camera as well. I mean, I actually teach standing up, so you can see I can move around a bit. And I can come a bit nearer when I want to and move back a bit. And I think, having that freedom and is quite good. So sort of learn to engage with the camera and watch yourself while you're teaching, sort of take more notice of your body language and start to develop it. I use my hands a lot, so I make sure I have my hands showing, things like that. So those are my tips.
Thank you for those tips, Nik. I think those are really useful, and it's also applicable to all teachers, not just English teachers, but anyone who's been put in front of the camera. Yes. So moving on, the next question I have is about your book, Hacking Creativity. And you were the finalist for the ELTon Innovation Awards 2020 for that book. How would you respond to teachers who argue that creativity is something that cannot be taught in a classroom?
I would absolutely disagree with that for a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, I know that a lot of people think that creativity is innate and you're either born with it or you're not. And I disagree with that too. I think creativity is innate, but I believe that we are all born with it. Unfortunately, what happens a lot of the time during education when children make the transition into being teenagers and the school system changes the way they interact with children, a lot of the time that creativity is just squashed and taken out of them. And, I think that's really sad. So I think creativity is something innate, but something that we have to nurture and develop. It also can be developed, and within the book there are ideas for sort of how to develop creativity, and creativity is a process as well. I mean, it is quite complex. I think a lot of people think creativity happens in this moment. You have this great brainwave, and all of a sudden you have a symphony in your head, or you have a great painting that you just go away and paint. But if you look at the people who are truly creative, they spend lots of times experimenting, making mistakes, discarding things. I mean, the Mona Lisa that was painted by Leonardo da Vinci, the historians believe that he painted it over the course of 17 years and kept coming back to it, changing it, making changes and adapting to it. And, creativity is that process. You have a problem, you brainstorm it, you work through the problems, you change things, you get feedback from people, you get input from other people. And I think it's important to build that process into, the way we address creativity with students. And within the book, there is a 7-step process that's outlined in that about how you can teach students to be creative problem solvers and creative thinkers. And I think it's quite important to kind of look at those things. One of the other things connected with creativity, I think, that's quite important is these ideas of the convergent and divergent thinking.
Yeah.
And I think, divergent thinking is that process where you kind of brainstorm and you get lots and lots of different ideas, and you can sort of switch off the part of your mind that judges those ideas and evaluates them and criticizes them, because that sort of blocks creativity. So think divergently, come up with lots of different ideas. And then the other type of thinking, convergent thinking, is when you start evaluating those ideas and knocking them together and seeing if you can make something new from them. So, developing those two ways of thinking within the classroom and within the creative activities that we do with students, I think is very important.
So Nik, this brings me to my next question, sentence level mechanics versus creativity. While one cannot replace the other, which do you think should primarily inform the English classroom?
I think, there needs to be some balance between the two, and maybe we need to address that balance a bit more. It's true that, we've been very systematic about going through grammar, teaching students the blocks of grammar to fit together. But in teaching those blocks, we don't touch on the student as a person. And I think in order to sort of promote deeper learning, where students really remember this and it becomes personal to them and part of their lives, we need to add the element of creativity and get them to sort of, use those blocks in a creative way to create language. I think there's also an argument for sort of, what comes first in this sort of fluency versus accuracy debate. Actually, creativity is part of the fluency, really, isn't it? You're sort of pushing students to do something with the language and create something with the language, which we have to do in order to become fluent. So I think if you really feel that you want to push fluency, then creativity is the right thing to do. Whereas it's playing with those building blocks and rearranging them isn't a very creative process, but it's important for the accuracy, isn't it? So I think there's that balance between the two and that interplay between the two that's important.
Yes, I do agree that there should be balance. And I think the good thing about English teaching today is a lot of it is happening online on virtual platforms. So teachers do have to get creative in order to make those lessons engaging for the digital natives. So I think there's a lot of, like you said, we're bringing it into the present, and there's opportunity to find that fine balance in English language classrooms, especially the virtual ones.
I just wanted to agree with your statement there. I think that's a very important point, and a very important thing about what digital and online can do. It can enable students to do a lot of that kind of mechanical moving around the blocks and getting the word order correctly. It can enable them to do that independently. We've got lots of online activities that they can do that. Whereas creativity, it's much better to do it with a person, and it's much more, much more challenging. So, we can separate where we do those things so that we work more economically with students' time when we have face-to-face time. And I think that's a really important point.
When we're thinking about creative writing for the English classroom, almost every English teacher would have thought about this, is to get your students to write about the pandemic. Do you think there's value in getting our young learners interested in writing about their experiences during the pandemic, and how do teachers get them excited about writing?
I think, I think it is important that, we give them that opportunity to write about it, or even to talk about it. I think this is an enormous thing that's happening at the moment. It's something that's happening globally, and something that's sort of, it's one of the biggest global pandemics for 100 years, and to live through this period of time, I think, is very important. It's very stressful for students, I guess, in a lot of ways, and they might be experiencing different things from knowing people who are dying or have died, and I think, just from the point of view of the students' well-being, it's good to give them the chance to write about this and express what they're feeling, and I think in terms of how we approach it, it should be very much that way. It should be, how much has this touched you? How has it affected you, rather than your kind of academics type essay. Well, this number of people have died in this country, and this number, but sort of, if we want to get them interested, it has to be something much more personal about how it's affected them. And I think that is very important, and it's something that we're going to need to work through with students, whatever age they are. I have a daughter who's little daughter who's 5 years old, and for her, she's living through this, and often sort of people just don't want to mention it to them and don't want to scare them, and I don't want to either. But it's good to know what's going on with her and how she perceives it and what she understands about what's going on as well. Makes it much easier to inform her and keep her on steady ground with that too.
Yes, I do agree, Nick, and writing can be a really good way to sort through your emotions and experiences and just lay it out in a manner that is slightly more comprehensible, especially when what's going on around the world is something completely unprecedented and something that you're not prepared to tackle. Moving on to our last question, Nick, I think a lot of AI methods are being developed for English language teachers and students to help them with the writing process. Do you think AI is important in education?
I think it is very important, and I think it will become more important. And of course, AI is developing all the time and getting better all the time. So what it can help us to do is becoming, that much more useful as well. I think there are a number of sort of cases of ways that we can use it. I mean, one is that, the more digital education we have, the more data we collect. And actually making sense of all this data. I mean, there's a lot to be learned from data, but making sense of it and going through all of it is very time consuming and difficult. Whereas AI can do that very quickly, and it can show us trends in data and things like that. So that's something that can tell us a lot about the way students learn, how effective different learning activities are, and things like that. Another one is that, I think AI can be very useful in terms of sort of online learning to give students support, and I know there's a university in the States that's using this at the moment. Lots of the questions that students ask are the same questions over again. So, as part of an online course, it could be questions about grammar, but we can pre-program AI to answer a lot of those questions, which again can take a lot of pressure off the teacher and save time for the teacher. AI can be, programmed to evaluate writing and, look for sort of grammar mistakes, error corrections, and, weaknesses in writing, and can give feedback on that. And equally with pronunciation and speaking too. So there are lots of things which can help, make students more autonomous and save time for teachers. So I think, and it's going to grow. There's going to be more of that as it progresses and develops. So I think that's great.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing your valuable tips for dealing with this transition for teachers around the world. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.